Well, welcome everybody to LSI Europe, London 2025. My name's Dave Uffer. I'm the Managing Director of Trinity Life Sciences, and I'll be your moderator for this session, Thriving Amidst Turbulence, Resiliency in MedTech. We've heard a lot of panels say how difficult MedTech is, but I think we're going to talk about the turbulent times and not have a woe is us situation. We're going to talk about what we've seen people successfully navigate in these turbulent times. I myself have been in MedTech about 35 years, everything from corporate strategy, business development, investing, advisory, investment banking, and we've seen a lot of different times. I'm joined by such a diverse group of panelists with different backgrounds. I'd like them to introduce themselves and we'll start getting into a discussion.
All right, great. Hi, everyone. My name is John White. I'm a managing director with KCK MedTech. We are a single-family evergreen fund. We make what I would describe as traditional venture capital investments, typically later clinical and earlier commercial stage companies. My background, I've been in MedTech for 20 years. Before I was an investor, I was an operator in a couple of different startups in the Bay Area and as a founder in a company back in the day. So happy to be here.
Thank you. My name is Ainhoa Manterola. I'm part of Sofina, which is an investment holding based in Belgium, but actually investing globally, managing 10 billion. And we're investing both in funds, but also in directs. And in directs, one of the sectors that we specialize in is healthcare, which I am leading for Sofina.
Hi, my name is Craig Smith. I'm on the venture capital team at Boston Scientific. I've been in MedTech for about 25 years in various legal roles and business development roles.
So Brian Smith, the new CEO of NAMSA. I am also an operating partner at the healthcare-only fund Archimed, which I think is the largest healthcare-only fund in the world. And glad to be here.
Well, thanks everybody and for the introduction. We've seen change in our industry. We've seen change in the markets, curveballs, difficult times, whatever it was, whether it's the U.S. financial crisis in the mid-2000s, the change in tax that we had levied on us in MedTech, even changes in MDR for European regulation. We're starting to see a little bit of turbulent times today. How are we navigating this? We'll talk about some of the turbulence that you're seeing now that are concerning either you as an investor or some of your portfolio companies.
Yeah, I mean, it's a broad question. I think there's lots of different areas where we can dive in. One of the things I look at as an investor is what exactly are the risks I'm underwriting in every single investment that I'm making. And when there's turbulence, that gets to be a more difficult proposition. So what I'm always looking for are teams that can focus and can come up with creative ways to work through whatever challenges come at them. I'd say one of the areas where we are struggling the most right now is around market access and reimbursement. And this is no surprise to anyone in this room, but that's an area where we see just a tremendous amount of change, a tremendous amount of difference when it comes to the game that you are playing with payers. And so for us, understanding what a company's strategy is and how they're going to attack those challenges is critical.
I know it. What do you see now that concerns you with turbulence?
Well, in our case, the thing is we typically invest after reimbursement has been granted. So let's say we're less exposed, or our portfolio companies are less exposed to that. What I would say is for our portfolio companies, things that have been in their minds this year is mainly tariffs because of they are manufacturing out of Europe or Asia and commercializing in the US, and also the NIH kind of uncertainties about funding.
Okay.
Yeah, I would concur just in terms of access to capital for the earlier stage companies, even the preclinical companies. I think that's a real challenge. Like many investors, we prefer to see some human data beforehand. We'll certainly invest before commercialization, but that early stage funding seems to be very challenging. I think there's capital available. I think it's just harder to find. I think a lot of it's residing in the family offices seem to be very active. Yeah. And there's also, I'm seeing a lot of activity in healthcare systems having funds set aside. So I think that's an access point that maybe hasn't been fully tapped. That's ready to step in.
That's interesting, actually. I think at the end of the day, right now, the lack of clarity that comes out of Washington in particular makes it very difficult for people to plan ahead. Where are they going to allocate dollars? Sadly, as an American, I'm the one that has to sit here and say that, but it really, particularly out of Health and Human Services, it makes investment where NAMSA is part of that R&D cycle. I think it makes it very challenging to make decisions. I think that's, at least I consider that one of the core drivers of froth in the market.
In general, I think the word you used that I would echo is uncertainty. And certainly Washington is not helping things when it comes to that right now. And it, as investors, like I said, we like to understand, I'm putting this money in, what risk am I taking? And oftentimes we're seeing just these externalities that come in and make things much more challenging.
So I used to say, it doesn't make a difference if you have higher earnings, lower earnings when it comes to your Wall Street performance.
Later stage, early stage, we're all up here struggling with some of these things.
Yeah, and as long as you can plan for what the factors are, you can build your business that way. But with the uncertainty, and I think the lack of, as you termed it, lack of clarity is just very difficult. Are you seeing your portfolio companies struggle with what do we do next and how should we navigate this?
Yeah. I mean, for sure. Maybe we could stick a little bit on the development side of things. I think there, what we're seeing is a focus on being more capital efficient. Sort of if you get capital in, making sure those dollars go farther and really prioritizing what is critical, because there are times when you can go after nice to have things, and there are times when you have to go after need to have things. And when you have uncertainty, which may impact your timeline, that's when you have to really start to focus on the must-haves, especially on the development side.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to put it. I think we see a lot of earlier to mid-stage companies that, that talk about their company and they talk about their product, but then they spend almost as much time talking about, what else that technology can be used for, and then talking about all these different iterations. It's like, if you can get one to work, you're going to be successful. So just focus on that one and let the other pieces, just kind of wait and don't get distracted with all these other opportunities, because getting one to work is all you really need, and oftentimes.
I think historically, clinical trials or things, they transcended administrations generally, so it did. But I think, again, there's enough disruption at the moment that it makes, even though you will transcend, right, I still think it makes it a little more difficult to know when and where to go. I mean, I just ran Archimed's neurosurgery company, AdTech, and, that is an incredibly hot space. And there is capital available there, but I think in some of the other therapeutic categories, those challenges are significant.
Yeah.
We see a lot of early stage companies.
Well, we sound like doom and gloom, don't we?
No, I think we'll lay out all the gloom or the turbulent factors as we market it that way. But we're here to give insights into the early stage companies and how they can navigate this. One thing you had mentioned, Craig, was the NIH funding. A lot of the early stage companies really rely on non-dilutive capital, not because it's non-dilutive, but because it's available, and you can start your companies that way. I just came from a workshop where we're talking about Reg CF and crowdfunding and even Reg D. Are you seeing a lot of difficulty getting some of these earlier mechanisms for funding the earlier stage companies? And where do you see that gap being filled?
Yeah, I do think there is a gap for early stage companies that are. I think one of the things that early stage companies can do to attract investment is to focus on a category where there really is an unaddressed TAM that is large, because then you can attract the quality investors that you're going to need to do the follow-ons and carry through pivotal. You look at the timelines for, you talked about the doom and gloom stuff. You talked about if you see timelines for development of a PMA product of a decade, you're going to go through 3 cycles of doom and gloom and different layers of, what the challenge is. The challenge today might be, uncertainty in the regulatory environment, and reimbursement, I think, is a big one. But in 5 years, it's going to be something else. So, focusing on a large TAM that's going to overcome the cycles is important. If it is a more niche product or category, again, I think there is money available in family offices, and many of them are focused on particular therapeutic groups that maybe have a different lens that they look at it, which I think can be very valuable, and the healthcare systems. And we've also seen situations where some of the service providers, some of the like R&D type shops, are willing to enter into some risk sharing arrangements. So I think those are ways that you can, push the company a year or 2 down the road before you talk to some of the, more name investors.
That's interesting you say that, because at NAMSA, we've created a program called Venture Ready. Now, we're not going to invest capital because we can't pass judgment on a device if we're an owner in it, right? Conflict of interest. But we've been able to plug into other sources of capital, almost all family office, who are super interested in being part of that.
Mm-hmm. I think what is really important is to think about the cap table that you are creating, and that cap table can sustain you over those different doom and gloom cycles. Because I think that having at least, maybe not all of them, but having just a percentage of that cap table being able to support the company across the cycles is really important, because that's when syndicates really work together. It's really important in times like this, I think.
Yeah, that is super important, and it can be such a challenge. The company has done so much work, and they get ready for a pivotal, and their cap table's exhausted.
Yes.
So that can be a real challenge. But if there are ways you can push the company further, so then you start, attracting the larger investors. It just might be a strategy that some companies might be able to use.
I think the reality here is there's at least what I'm seeing is there is some capital at the very early seed stage formation, like you say, within family offices, especially if you can find an investor that is passionate about what you're doing. That is, and look, sometimes that just takes a lot of calls, a lot of meetings, a lot of LSI conferences. But when you find that person who's passionate, that is what can carry you forward. There is a lot of capital at the pivotal and early commercial stage. Like, I'm seeing a lot of financings at that stage. I'm seeing a lot of very large financings, almost over capitalization at that stage. And so we have another investor that we work with, and he always says, look, you've got to survive in advance. That's what the key is, until you can kind of break through into that pivotal stage. And at that point, there does feel like, provided you've got a big TAM and you're going after a category that's interesting, there feels like there's capital to be had there. But it's just getting through there, where it takes a lot of creativity, and frankly, a lot of effort, and you're going to get a lot of no's along the way. But when you find that investor that's passionate about it, that's really the key to move yourself forward.
This is a difficult way to pitch it with investors here. But we understand the market speaks for itself, and especially at the later stage where there's a lot of competition, maybe we look at different terms. At the early stage, do you think there's fairness in the pricing and the terms that are being set in these valuations? Because I hear a lot of grumbling or whining, if I were to put it that way, from the company saying, I got a nice investor coming along, but boy, the terms are just nearly predatory.
So this is a supply and demand ecosystem, and right now in the early stage, there is not a lot of supply of capital. But also, having done both early and late stage investing, I'm here to tell you that when you get to that pivotal round, or you get to that commercial round, those investors are going to be putting prices on top of you as the earlier investor that you may not like. And so it's a market. I wish there was more capital sloshing around everywhere for everyone, but it's just not the case. And so the one thing I will say is, if you do what you say you are going to do and you execute as a management team, I, as an investor, am always going to keep you aligned with the success of the company, because I know if you're not aligned, you're not going to put in the effort to drive the outcome that we're looking for. So, especially some earlier stage investors may not understand that the long game may just be building equity in your options and kind of running from there.
Craig, Boston Sci, you will both lead and follow on.
We typically do not lead, but we will lead at times. And we tend to lead more so in the earlier stages. If there's something that we are particularly interested in, and sometimes, you need that term sheet from Boston Scientific for other people to join in. And I did want to comment about the pricing for early rounds and early stage companies. I frankly think that it is more realistic pricing because, the more sophisticated investors know the timelines. You see the deck that shows 4 years, and an experienced investor knows it's 8 years, and it's twice as much money. And they do need to preserve that ownership for, 2 more rounds than the founders are anticipating. So I don't think it might feel predatory. I don't necessarily think that it is. I think it's more realistic. And if you can, then build that investor group with more and more high quality investors and a step up in basis, that feels great than taking money at an inflated valuation and then, running into a stone wall when you're trying to raise that next round and nobody wants to sign up for what feels like a predatory round at that stage. So it doesn't feel good for the early investors, but just maybe, consider that there's another side to that story.
Yeah, the companies I'm on the board, just to your term, to steal it again, to survive and move on, you need to do that, and you'll make it up in next rounds as you reach milestones. You'll be rewarded for the milestones you make, but these companies that you're going to go back and make sure you get a strong investor. We're so concerned about that valuation today, because when you need that bridge, you're going to go back to them and they'll be by your side. Make sure they're good investors that are early stage.
I would say that the medtech investing community, whether venture or private equity, is much smarter than it was 10 years ago as well. You've seen an evolution of, that's why I think, to your point, if you're 4 years and 8 million, it's really 8 years and 16 million. I just think as an industry, we have become wiser with a few burn marks. But I do think the investing community is much more aware of what's really out there. And so bringing, an offering to the table that is not in line with realities, not advantageous.
I feel like we should have renamed this session Survive in Advance. I think that just sounds much more positive than Thriving Amidst Turbulence, because there's always turbulence. I think Survive in Advance, that's the theme here, because there's no secret sauce to, thriving amidst turbulence other than persistence and survive in advance.
Well, let's go real, ladies and gentlemen. Fasten your seatbelts. Hold on. In turbulence, let's throw out the T word. We talked about tariffs, and you mentioned that that's a big issue today. Is it really big? Is it, close your eyes in 6 months, we'll see what happens, or you better prepare for this today? How are you telling your portfolio again, or what are you looking at companies and evaluating them differently with this on the table? I know.
Yes, on our companies, I mean, there's quite a few that have been affected, as I was mentioning. And so what we tell them is to prepare different. The thing is, there's so much uncertainty. So that's the issue that we're having, I think, here, especially these past months. Like it was really a lot of guessing, let's say, of what was going to happen. So in the end, what we've asked our companies is really to map their current manufacturing, the different origins of the SKUs, really understanding what could the potential impact be and what are the plan A, plan B, plan C options, and understanding what's the impact on the bottom line, really understanding what is reasonable and what are the timelines and what are the potential ROIs of moving or not certain sourcing. But in the end, because of that uncertainty, you can only plan for it and choose and readjust depending on what happens.
Yeah. And I'd say our advice has sort of started with recognition that it's really uncertain. And then at least the first couple of months, we've sort of said, just delay, extend, get through it. But now I think what's happening is we're all seeing like this is either it is even though it's still uncertain, it is here to stay. And so now we're going through and executing on some of the different scenarios that we've laid out with some of our companies, where if there's an option to bring some of the manufacturing over to the U.S., we do it. Most of the time that's not possible, in which case we're looking for different suppliers in different geographies so that we have different access points depending on what's going on out in the market. But, some of this is also just financial planning and sort of modeling in worst case and saying, this is what's going to hit us. And so we better be able to absorb it from a financial point of view.
When I was living in China, in Shanghai, we were building out these supply chains. And I think one of the things that's missing at the moment is actual time impact. Because if you've got a bill of materials in, Suzhou, China, and you want to land something in Des Moines, Iowa, a finished product, that's 5 months, probably minimum sometimes, as you get through all the intermodal transportation. And I think we really haven't seen as yet the net impact of tariffs, just because it's been approximately since 5 months since the announcement of tariffs. I think we're going to begin over this quarter, the next quarter, I think, to perhaps, unfortunately, feel that impact a little more.
Yeah, I'd say that to your point that we are making the hard decisions now, but whereas before we're like, well, we'll just kind of delay and we've built up some inventory and we can kind of get through this. But that luxury is sort of gone, I think.
The CEO of one of the larger healthcare systems in North America is a friend of mine. And I said, did you just buy everything you could in the first quarter? And he said, absolutely. Every warehouse we have is full. Yeah. I can't pay the light bill, so I have no cash. But no, I think that there was a lot of that in the first 2 quarters, and that'll go away in 3 and 4.
As we sit here in Europe, are there credible news sources, or is everybody getting the same information on a timely basis? Or do you see a challenge in what to read, what to believe, what's really going to happen?
I don't think you can really predict what's going to happen. There's also the recent. Actually, I don't recall if it's a Supreme Court. I think it was an appeals court decision that said many of the tariffs were inappropriate because they were not based upon a true emergency. So this will be litigated back and forth for a while. Also, during the time period when you start to see some of the potential results of the tariffs, coupled with what they actually bring in, I think in another 45 to 30 days, there will be, maybe some forced certainty between the court system and people seeing actual results, and maybe, attenuating some of the things. I mean, one thing with uncertainty is, the tariffs kind of, there's a lot of talk. They kind of went in, and then they get renegotiated on different terms based upon who the last visitor was. And so that's going to continue. And so I like John said, you just have to make the best decision you can. And if you're going after a large enough TAM, and in the medtech industry, we are very fortunate in this industry that if you do have an approved product and it's a quality product, our margins are actually enviable to most industries. And if you're losing some points on gross margin, you can still have a successful company. I don't think it's going to, I don't think it's necessarily going to put any, companies out of business. And if that starts to happen, I think there could be reactions in another way. You talk about, or, compressive gross margins, potentially from tariffs. I think the biggest risk out there is reimbursement, and reimbursement really at a macro level as the population ages and the stress on the healthcare systems and what can be paid for and what can be afforded. It's harder to put your head around than a 50% tariff and a 40% or a 20% tariff. But how healthcare systems are going to how they're going to make really, really difficult decisions over the next 5 years, I think is a potential bigger risk.
Let's go in that direction then, because as an advisor in strategy consulting, we don't get as much as the general strategy as we do now, everything market access. And whether it's, do I fall under DRG and how do I address a value analysis committee, or I'm watching value-based healthcare creep into certain segments. What are the biggest challenges that your portfolio companies are running into? And what are you really challenging your companies that you're looking at for investment to understand what that risk factor in reimbursement or market access is?
If you want to talk about uncertainty, try to get coverage for your new technology. It is not, at least we used to complain about regulatory and this, but at least with the FDA, there's usually a pretty good series of steps that you need to follow. And there's some off ramps where you might get stuck, but in general, you kind of can plan for it. Getting coverage has been really challenging. We just don't see consistency in what ultimately works to get coverage. And so when I talk to companies, I'm looking to see do they have a plan when it comes to the basics, the coding, the payment rates, all of these things? And then are they realistic about coverage? Have they planned appropriately for the amount of effort it's going to take? Do they understand who are the payers they've got to go get? Is this a Medicare population, a commercial population? And do they understand the game, which I guess when I run across someone who does, it gives me a lot of confidence that we've got a chance when we're out there. But you have to plan for it taking a lot longer and being a lot more challenging than you think it will.
Yeah, irrational and unpredictable for commercial coverage. I've been surprised so many times for products that have pretty good evidence that net take costs out of the system and they don't get covered for years. And that can be really disappointing and challenging for companies.
Yeah, there's a great study out of Stanford Biodesign that really shows the time it takes large breakthrough technologies to get coverage. And that is a sobering paper. It's something that I think we can work on as a group, as an industry. But it is something you have to plan for.
I would expect the early stage companies that they can't have all the solutions, but they have to be looking to a life. And Noah, at the stage where you're coming in, I would expect that they have very specific plans in how they're going to deal with reimbursement and coverages. Are you seeing them ready to answer those questions in specific plans, or still red flags around the market for you?
I would say in our case, because they already have the reimbursement when we invest, so that's typically already covered. And so the question is really about commercialization. So that's where they need to be, I agree with that, they need to be very clear on who are the clients, how to start that, core base of customers, just to show not only the reimbursement, but also how successful they're going to be commercializing. And then being able to scale and raise the capital for that real later stage commercialization. So that's where we really play.
the good management teams know that their commercial strategy is going to be driven by their coverage. And so if you crack Medicaid of Ohio, you're putting 2 sales reps in Ohio, and you're not going to have any in Illinois. Do you have the right market access people out there who are going to be able to get to meetings, get you in front of the payers to make the case for your technology? That's sort of way down at the commercial end of things. When you get those meetings, you really have to have done the work up front to make sure you've got the right studies that are designed, and you've got the right health economic evidence, because getting the meeting is so hard. When you actually get your shot, you have to nail it. And so, that's why it's critical to think about this journey from the very beginning.
No, this is not a plug for NAMSA, but we see the evidence of what you're talking about, where a lot of our consulting work has been slower. EU MDR slowed things down, as you can imagine, but where we do see that is on reimbursement. And I can tell you that if you don't have an A+ plan the moment you get your shot, you don't get a lot of second bites at that apple.
No. So, Brian, I want to specifically ask you, because of the experience with NAMSA, I would see too many companies would go out and do the clinical trial and then say, well, did you do the secondary endpoints, just bury them into the trial? Oh, no, we didn't. We're going to do a trial for the economic endpoints. So you just doubled your expense or added another 40%, whatever the number is, where you could have had secondary, the learning to put these secondary economic endpoints. They're just as important, sometimes even more important than the clinical endpoints that we're looking at.
We would agree with you. Our chief medical officer sitting over there smiling at me. I think that what we see now is when a venture-backed organization, we see a lot of early stage things because we do a lot of the early stage testing, biocompatibility, et cetera. I think we see when VCs come to us and talk about one of their portfolio companies, we now spend more time talking about the economic, as much time, I shouldn't say as much time, because you make a great point, right? FDA is an imperfect institution, as all government institutions are, but there is a pathway, right? Okay, you get dinged a couple of times, you need some more evidence here, but there is a pathway. I think to your point, the economic pathway has become equally, if not more difficult. Yeah. At least that's for the startups that we work with.
Yeah. And I think you can be creative. Like on your clinical evidence, we've got a company that is running an amazing post-market registry. It took a little bit of doing to get it through the IRB, but now that it's through the IRB, we're working with patients and collecting patient outcome information by texting them and getting simple follow-up answers. And when you come to a payer with a study with an N of 1,500, like that's a really different conversation than I've got my, 200 patient RCT, or, you need to have the RCT too, or that's step one, but kind of coming to them with sort of overwhelming evidence is at least a strategy that we've had to take with some of our portfolio.
Where the clinicals, you could have many different phases and cost structures to that. Are you okay with? I've seen folks go to different geographies for either the EFS just before they go do a U.S. trial. If that's the market that they intend to launch to initially, they'll do EFS in different geographies, whether it's sometimes Central, South America. I've seen them go to Eastern Europe, all over the world, India.
Yeah. I mean, you probably see a lot of these things as them.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good strategy. Before you invest the time, money, and lock down your pivotal with the FDA. And so if you can save some time and money doing EFS in other jurisdictions, I think that can be really helpful. And I think where it's most helpful is in working out the training and putting it into various doctors' hands, because so many early stage companies, they're really tied into a very small cadre of top level physicians who can do the procedure and they think it's awesome. And then you put it in the hands of people who have been trained by the company, but it's just a different level of of competence. And then when you put it out into a pivotal trial and then into the market, just working out all those bugs of what's really important. I mean, Boston Scientific, everybody's had it where you've had really good products, but the training was not right and you had mixed results and it ends up coming off the market. So speed, efficiency, and you can learn a hell of a lot doing EFS in other countries, I think.
Yeah,
Sure.
I appreciate that comment. I had a meeting this morning with a clinician from the Mayo, and we were looking at the technology. He said, I can think of maybe 4 people in my department who could use that. Never mind, just not the Mayo clinicians, but when you go to the general community.
Yeah.
And we all like to go to the KOLs first to get input, but we forget sometimes that they're about the 5 or 10% that could deploy some of this until you make it broader.
I think for us, the question of where your data comes from depends a lot on what the technology is. Actually, I see my friend from Vitestro in the in the audience. That's an example where a blood draw, if it's automated, you can do that lots of different places, and I'm going to have confidence in that. If it's a super complex catheter-based procedure, maybe like the one you're talking about earlier, that's when a lot of the training comes into play. That's where I'm going to start to make sure it's going to fit into the U.S. System, because for us, by and large, we're looking at the U.S. market at the end of the day. So it does depend a lot, and the FDA is going to have really different opinions on that as well.
You're making my day, because we just had a strategy session in Chicago for 3 days with the executive team, and medical education was at the very top of the list. More cadaveric work, different ways of approaching, now taking some of the animals out of the equation. So to hear you guys say that is encouraging.
Yeah.
Well, we do have a few minutes. I think we're here for you as the audience. So if anybody has questions, please raise your hand. We have some microphones that will circulate. Do you have a question for the panelists?
Thank you.
We can hear you.
Thank you. This is Marcin from Archimed. It seems like you've been in this market for quite a while. How many of the turbulences we've been discussing you think are structural versus cyclical? A function of interest rates going higher, the capital becoming less available, and so forth. Thank you.
I have to deal with him every day, so you can take that one.
I'll say there is some cyclicality to things like tariffs. There are some underlying structural elements, though, that we can't just hope are going to resolve. So I think, in particular, the point that was brought up earlier around just look at our ability to pay for these innovations, just step back and sum up all the money that's available and all the costs that's coming into the system. And you can see that's a structural element that we're going to have to deal with. And it kind of makes sense that market access might be harder now because that situation is becoming obvious to everyone. So I think some of the cyclical things are putting pressure on us like today in the moment, and that makes things even harder. I do think some of those things will ease in the future, but we always have to understand this is medtech. This is hard. We're doing it for the right reasons because it's great for patients and great for outcomes. So put your head down, survive, and advance is maybe the summary there.
Yeah, I think if we learn nothing else, we're always going to have a new challenge. And as you started this out saying, you want people who are adept at being able to deal with a new issue and that are good leaders that know how to navigate any turbulent time, not just what we're facing today. I think we could have had this session 3 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. There's always going to be a little bit of a curveball in your face. Any last one before we close out our session? Heather?
I wonder if you can comment on what you mean by low pre-money valuations, because I think it's all very different depending upon the industry. But if you have a low ingoing pre-money, then do the investors align with topping up capital structures through ESOP programs? And what would that standard be in your particular industries?
I'm not sure I totally understand the question. What I would say is, in general, we're going to set aside enough space in the option pool to make sure we can incentivize employees. What is that? It depends on what stage of the development cycle the company's at. It's really different if you're late stage commercial than if you're all the way down at the beginning. So that's gonna scale. I think on the pre-money side, I think the main point is setting yourself up for success as you continue to raise capital. Because if you put yourself in a valuation stranglehold because you pushed your valuation very high in the early stages, it's going to get very challenging later to raise capital, and someone's going to have to do a lot of work to reset that structure.
Yeah, and I agree on keeping management incentivized. I mean, we're very sensitive to that as well. That's what you're betting on, so that's important.
So do you think that it's an appropriate thing in this particular difficult market where pre-money is de minimis, and as you go, the understanding is that the success-based incentives will be more highly aligned than they might normally be? Instead of moving from a 10 to 20% kind of ESOP program, can it be a preference off the top, assuming that performance reaches a certain hurdle? Because I'm plagued with, how do you come up with an appropriate valuation if some of you are kind of the early stage versus it's proven, and valuation today is all over the place?
Yeah, I don't think there's any, I don't think there's any secret sauce or calculation. I think it's supply and demand, and I don't think that complicated structures like management carve-outs and stuff are the right conversation at an early stage. I think early stage it just has to be a management pool of the 10 to 20% or whatever. That's something fairly standardized. And if valuations get ahead of things and it has to get reset, that's when those conversations will have to come around about choosing the management pool or a carve out or some other more complicated when the runway is a little more clear.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a wrap. I'm looking at the flashing light. Many thanks to the LSI staff for putting this together, the panelists for sharing your insights and your time, and the audience for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Igor.